What's going on, everybody? It's Warren. Welcome back to the Cosmic Wonder, where we talk all things Marvel and MCU and Spider-Man. Spider-Man No Way Home continues to crush it at the box office, and right now there are a ton of reports about new Spider-Man movies coming, not just with Tom Holland Spider-Man, but with Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, and possibly Tobey Maguire popping up again sometime down the road. But today I want to talk about possibly the biggest question that a lot of people had after Spider-Man No Way Home, one that has caused quite a bit of confusion with the community and the audience. And that question is, why did everybody forget who Peter Parker was entirely in Spider-Man No Way Home and not just forget that Peter Parker was Spider-Man? Now, the movie did answer this, but with this answer came a lot of other questions. But the writers have recently opened up in an interview with Variety and have addressed some things that happened off screen, but have happened nonetheless, that kind of explain the dynamics of that final spell that Doctor Strange cast and how it exactly worked. And that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. So if you love Spider-Man and want to stay up to date on all the recent Spider-Man and MCU news, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of the latest videos. So the first thing that we have to talk about is the actual spell that Doctor Strange did, because some people think that this is the same spell that he was going to do originally to make everybody forget that Peter Parker was Spider-Man. That was what was originally supposed to happen, but at the end, it is a very different spell, and they fully explain this. In the final scene where Doctor Strange says they're starting to come through and I can't stop them, Peter says, "There's gotta be something we can do. Can't you just cast the spell again, the original way, before I screwed it up?" But then Doctor Strange replies, "We're too late for that. They're here. They're here because of you." And this right here is where the spell actually changes from what it originally was in the beginning of the film. Peter says, "What if everyone forgot who I was? They're coming here because of me, right? Because I'm Peter Parker. So cast a new spell, but this time make everyone forget who Peter Parker is." So he asked Doctor Strange to make everybody forget who he is, not make everybody forget that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, but make everybody forget Peter Parker completely. He says, "Make everybody forget me." And then they further clarify this where Peter says, "It would work, right?" And Doctor Strange says, "Yeah, it would. But you gotta understand, that would mean that everyone who knows and loves you, we'd have no memory of you." And then he says the final defining moment of the spell where he says, "It would be as though you never existed." And then of course, in a very true Peter Parker moment, perhaps the most Peter Parker moment that Tom Holland has ever been in his trilogy, he says, "I know, do it," putting everybody else and the universe really before him. And then of course he leaves, Doctor Strange casts the spell, and nobody knows who he is. Not MJ, not Ned, not Happy, nobody. Like Doctor Strange said, it would be as though he never existed, but how could this actually be? Because you have to imagine that Ned has to have at least hundreds of pictures of him and Peter on his phone. Same with MJ, they have to have pictures together. She has necklaces and bracelets and trinkets that Peter gave her. They just went through this whole final battle on the Statue of Liberty where they literally saw Peter. How is there no possible way that they don't know who Peter Parker is? How was Peter erased from their phones? How was Peter erased from pictures, actual physical pictures that they might have had in frames in their houses? Well, the writers for Spider-Man No Way Home, and of course they wrote Spider-Man Homecoming and Far From Home as well, kind of give us an explanation of everything that happened at the end in an interview with Variety. And I'm going to go over the entire section of this article right here that is titled "The Problem with Memory Canceling Spells." I'll go over this so you can hear exactly what they said word for word, and then I'll explain what happens at the end of Spider-Man No Way Home. Now, this first part I actually really like because they talk about Tom Holland's Peter Parker becoming closer to the comic accurate Peter Parker. This section begins by saying, "May's death was a step in the filmmaker's mission to strip everything away from Holland's Peter and leave him, by the end of No Way Home, much closer to his true comic book origins. A scrappy kid with almost no resources beyond his intellect and superhuman abilities. That culminates with his decision to repair the widening rift in the multiverse by having Strange cast a spell that makes everyone, everywhere, forget him as Peter Parker. Now, right off the bat, they have to establish everywhere because everyone is coming from other universes to his universe. So when they say everywhere in this article, they mean everywhere, not just in the main MCU timeline and universe, but in all of the other universes as well. But the writers actually admit that there are a little bit of problems that come with this decision. The article continues to read, since Holland's Peter still exists in the MCU, his decision has a litany of wide-ranging and persnickety problems attached to it. Does this mean all records of him are gone too? Does he still have a social security number? Are the photos of MJ and Ned gone from his phone? And so on. Which are the questions that all of us have. And here's what writers Eric Sommers and Chris McKenna had to say about this. In truth, the filmmaking team talked at length about the implications of the anti-Peter spell and how the movie could address them. We were like, do we do a Back to the Future kind of thing where you see him fading out of photos? Does he still have a driver's license or passport? It just led to more questions. So we decided, let's try to do it in the most satisfying way, and we can just focus on the emotion of it. And then, if people have questions about some of those details that didn't get answered here, we'll answer them hopefully in another movie somewhere down the road. Obviously, some sort of magical redaction has occurred. At the end of all of this, we didn't want a lot of people trying to do magical math in their head. They then say that executive producer Amy Pascal suggested looking to the 1978 Warren Beatty comedy Heaven Can Wait for a solution. People had these experiences, but they start forgetting the person they knew, but they were still affected by the events that happened, McKenna explained. They then explained that the final donut scene was the most important thing to focus on. McKenna says, you want to have that donut scene be him making the last piece of the sacrifice. I could tell them everything, I can try to get my friends back, but I'd be going right back to the place of endangering my loved ones by bringing them into my life, and I can't have that. And I personally love that that happened because that is true Peter Parker, true comic Spider-Man. So although the writers didn't really want us to be doing the math on all of this that happened, we are because we have all of these questions, but luckily for us, they kind of do explain their thinking. They mentioned that they talked about doing a Back to the Future style of memory erasing where Peter just kind of got erased from photos. This also happened in Harry Potter, where Hermione made her parents forget who she was. She kind of just faded away in all the pictures that they had, and we can assume that this is pretty much what happened in the MCU. The writers talked about showing it, and although they didn't, they do explain that this is essentially what happened. They only didn't show it because they wanted that final scene where Peter makes that final sacrifice to be the focus of it all. But it is clear that Peter has been erased from everything. Even at the end, we see him with a GED book. This means that Peter Parker has been erased from the records of his high school. Magically, his name disappeared from all records of him. Magically, his pictures that he took with his friends, he just disappeared from those pictures. All memory and evidence that Peter Parker ever existed, like Doctor Strange says, has been erased. Now, how is he going to go forward without a social security number and passport and such things like that? Well, that's something that is definitely going to be explored in the next film. The writers talked about how they would indeed address that in the next film, and recently Marvel Studios and Sony came out and said, yes, we are indeed working on the next Spider-Man film with Tom Holland. So another Spider-Man movie with Tom Holland is 100% confirmed, in which Tom Holland's Peter Parker is going to have to deal with the repercussions of that spell, of Peter Parker essentially being erased from existence, which will be interesting to see. But for those of you who were wondering about this spell and what has happened to Peter Parker, nobody remembers him, and it looks like there is no trace of him to be found anywhere. He's not in pictures, he's not on transcripts for schools, there's no social security number. Peter Parker has been erased essentially from every single person's mind, any type of database and any type of paper trail in the MCU. I hope you found this video useful. Don't forget to subscribe for more Spider-Man and MCU videos so you can stay up to date on everything. Don't forget to like the video, and for live updates, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. Woof woof.